Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Drunk Agile. Just waking up from her nap. In the background there is the star of the show, Nisha. Wonderful timing as always. And with me, the Yogi Berra of Agile.
Prateek saying.
Probably the reason why Nisha is the way she is, poor thing. You can't choose, who adopts you. And my name is Daniel Vacanti. Prateek, what are you drinking tonight?
Wow, we are back to the Stag. 64.2%. Stag Junior, one of the favorites on this podcast.
Yeah, I'm on the Auchentoshan 25. Auchentoshan is normally, I think I say this all the time, Auchentoshan is normally one of my favorites. This one, I'm like, let's just get through this, because it's leaves a little bit to be desired.
Put it out as misery.
Yeah, so, but it is 25, 44.8 bourbon barrel. Cheers, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Oh, I was supposed to drink when I cheers. Prateek, what's on tap for tonight?
Today, we are talking about histograms, time series data, fat tail, thin tail distributions, a whole bunch of random math stuff, really, that folks try to apply to process analysis and probably shouldn't.
Yeah, you keep saying 2 drink minimum, but I think we need to up it to like a 3 or 4 drink minimum for
this one, I don't know,
for some of this stuff. But yeah, well, histograms. I don't know how this. I think we start off a lot of our episodes this way. I don't know how histograms came to be prominent in the Kanban community. I just don't know where that came from. I don't know why, but they are. For certain data anyway, and let's talk about cycle time data, and we'll talk about what time series data really means in a little bit. But yeah, showing your cycle time data in histogram seems to be a favorite of a lot of people in the Kanban community, and I'm just not sure why. Like I said, I don't know where that came from, and we're going to talk about why that's probably a very, very bad thing to do. And from the very beginning of process analysis, people have known you should not be putting cycle time data in a histogram. So why these people continue to keep making the same mistakes, I don't know. So where should we start, Prateek? What do you think? How do we start this one off?
Well, let me ask you why. What is time series data, and why should it not be on a histogram?
Let me see if I can give a Prateek answer. All right. So time series data is a series of data that you show over time. Is that a
series of data points?
Data points. Sorry.
Yeah.
Series of data points that you show over. Yeah. It's anytime you are collecting data where when that data is collected is an element, is a part of the context of that data. So that's it. So cycle time is a classic example of time series data, because when something finishes is just as important as how long it takes in a lot of contexts, because there's a lot of things that are going on, as we're doing things. So you have the quote. Do you still have the quote by Shewhart in front of you?
Oh yeah,
because this is one. So most people in the Kanban community, if I can just set the scene. Sorry, I cut you off. I know, I'm sorry, but let me just set the scene and then you can. Hey, you drink. Yeah. Most people in the Lean community know who W. Edwards Deming is. Very, very few people know who Walter Shewhart is. And Walter Shewhart, I always like to say this. I don't know if it's true or not, but Walter Shewhart essentially taught Deming everything there is to know, everything that Deming knows or knew. About statistical process control. SPC was essentially developed by Walter Shewhart, and he taught Deming. So this is back in the, I want to say it's the 30s. It was either late 20s, early 30s that Shewhart published his first book on statistical process control. And specifically when he was talking about data analysis, he was saying how you should not mislead when you display your data. You should not mislead by showing your time series data in a histogram. So Prateek, can you give us the exact quote, please?
So the exact quote is, whenever an average, range, or histogram is used to summarize data, the summary should not mislead the user into taking action that the user would not take if the data were presented in a time series.
Yep.
So 3 things there that he points out pretty directly: average, range, or histogram. Those 3 things. If you have time series data, don't use them.
That's pretty clear. I don't know how we get much clearer than that. And we have a great example. We brought visual aids for tonight. We have a great example of this. I'm going to share my screen if I can. This is data that is near and dear to Prateek's heart. Do you want to kind of explain where this data came from?
Yeah, this data is from a team that I led a while ago, and as you can see, 2014, 2015. And this was a team that was not limiting its WIP initially in the initial part of this. As you can see again, it was a Scrum team that wasn't quite doing Scrum very well and wasn't limiting WIP. And then we started limiting WIP, and you see the effect of that on the latter part of this chart, how the performance of that team changed over time.
Yeah, so those of you who've taken classes from me, you know, this is one of my favorite examples to show in my Kanban trainings, in my metrics trainings. If for no other reason, I get an opportunity to pick on Prateek when I do show this. But it's pretty clear. I mean, as Prateek just mentioned, by looking at this chart, it's pretty darn obvious that something happened roundabout the 1st of October. And these are American dates, by the way, so apologies to people in Europe. These are American dates. But somewhere around the 1st of October, something happened in this system, something happened in this process that fundamentally changed how this team performed. And that's exactly what we're talking about with time series data, where when the data is collected is a critical element, is a critical part of the context of doing that data analysis. Now, so this is a scatter plot. This is a cycle time scatter plot. And again, my next favorite thing I like to do is, okay, well, let's see this in a histogram. Okay, so we're going to show this data in a histogram. Now the question becomes, Prateek, when did that team start limiting work in progress? When did that team start paying attention to aging and flow and things like that? Looking at this histogram, when did all that happen?
One, you cannot answer that, and 2, it's kind of funny to see the juxtaposition of the scatter plot below, and so you can kind of see this all at the same time. But just looking at the histogram, there is absolutely no way that you can tell when that happened.
Right. And so if all you were doing was looking at the histogram, and we'll talk about fat tail versus thin tail later, although kind of spoiler alert and disclaimer, we have no idea. We literally, we don't know fat tail, we just don't know. But you know, if all you were doing was looking at this histogram and you didn't have, let me turn that off, and you didn't have that context of the scatter plot below, you know, you might be lulled into thinking, well, look at all these extreme outliers out here. We're gonna have to do something about that. Whereas, you know, if we pull in this date control, and now we zoom in on this part, the histogram, where the team was actually limiting work in progress and doing out, you see, you would not take that action. And this is exactly what Shewhart is talking about. This is, I don't know, I think this is picture perfect to demonstrate what Shewart's talking about. That was the segue for you to do something.
Yeah, I know, and I don't want to jump ahead into the fat tail, thin tail stuff, but we'll come back to it. And those of you who know what fat tail and thin tail mean, 1, please tell us, leave some comments, tell us what it means. And 2, you will see that this exact same data, depending on the date range you select, can be called fat tail or thin tail, whatever the definition of those are, because they look very different. And that's another indication when depending on the time you select, if that data is changing so much, it's another indication that you probably have time series data.
I have to remember to stop screen sharing, because, you know, people would much rather look at us than the chart, I think. Yeah, although we're going to go back to the chart very quickly. Well, I don't know. Was there something else that you wanted? Because maybe we should get into the fat tail, thin tail right now. Was there something else you wanted to say about that data before we transition over?
No. We'll go back to it when
because we have a lot to say about that. Okay, yeah. So Prateek, what is fat tail versus thin tail?
I'm sorry, I cannot stop laughing about this. But when you divide the 98th percentile of your data from the 50th percentile of your data, no, don't do that. Just don't do that. If anyone tells you ever to divide percentiles of your data to figure out what your data is doing, just don't do it. Just shut the door and tell them that, hey, we'll talk some other day, which will be no day. Just don't do that.
Seriously, what is it? It's some completely arbitrary mathematical.
5.6. What is 5.6?
It's the what's the 98th divided by the what? The
98th divided by the 50th.
If it's greater than 5 point.
If it's greater than 5.6, it's supposedly fat-tailed, and if it's less than that, then it's thin-tailed.
Because, likewise, I don't know if you knew this, Prateek, but the Fibonacci series goes, 8, 13, 20, 40, 100. Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that.
We need to come up with some visual that we just throw out there and go, because math.
Because math.
Hey, we did math. We must be right. But
take a drink.
Yeah, no, take a drink. You can't. Just don't do that. Just don't go about dividing random percentiles and figuring this stuff out.
Yeah, keep going. I'm gonna give another visual aid. Keep talking.
Okay. What fat tail means, as far as I understand, is that when you place your data in histogram, just like as Dan was showing, the histogram stretches out for a while, and the values on the far right of it, are there are very few values and they're very far apart. That's fat-tailed. What's thin-tailed is when it doesn't stretch out that far and the values are more evenly distributed.
And sorry, go ahead.
Why the thinner tail is called fat-tailed and the fatter tail is called thin-tailed, I don't know.
Yeah,
but that's what that means.
But the implication, if I understand, and I do not, by the way, I do not pretend to understand, but the implication being that if you have a fat-tailed distribution, you are by definition unpredictable. Whereas if you have a thin-tailed distribution, you are by definition predictable. Is that the implication?
That is the implication. That if your 98th percentile and 50th percentile are off by less than a factor of 5.6, right, it means you're predictable.
And so this is where we need to bring in another visual aid and another name. If you haven't heard this name, you really need to know this name. Dr. Donald Wheeler, who actually can trace his lineage about statistical process control literally all the way back to Wheeler, through Deming and to Wheeler. I think Dr. Wheeler learned everything from Dr. Deming. And Dr. Wheeler's point about this is, and I hope I don't, forgive me, I don't want to necessarily put words in his mouth, but the way that I understand how Dr. Wheeler talks about this, he doesn't necessarily care about fat-tailed or thin-tailed either. What he really cares about is, do you have homogeneous data or not? Because Dr. Wheeler's whole point is, one of the first things you need to do when you're doing data analysis is to understand if you have homogeneous data. Because if you have non-homogeneous data, and we'll talk about what non-homogeneous means here in a second, but if you have non-homogeneous data, then any analysis that you might do on that data might be suspect. You look like you were going to jump in and say something there.
No. That's good.
Okay, so let's get back to our visual aid.
Yeah.
If I can, I hope I didn't close it. Nope, I didn't. So we're going to get back to our visual aid. So if we get back to, if we get back to this chart and go back to the scatter plot, it's, while not obviously mathematically rigorous, and I don't know if we have time to get into the mathematics of how you would do this. It's essentially just putting this data into a control chart. But we can just kind of qualitatively look at this chart. And as a data analyst, look at this and see, this is obviously not homogeneous data. This is just not, because we have a whole bunch of stuff over here on the left that looks completely different from the stuff on the right. And so what what Dr. Wheeler would say then, okay, now your first task is, okay, make your data as homogeneous as possible for analysis. Again, if we go to the histogram and we do that, and we don't show the data control, right? Just looking at the histogram, it's impossible to know whether your data is homogeneous or not. You just don't know. And you're going to jump to the conclusion that, yes, this is a fat tail. I think I'm saying that right, that this is a fat tail. And therefore unpredictable. Whereas really what you've got here is non-homogeneous data. And if we were to zoom in on the part that is more homogeneous, we could see, no, actually we're very predictable. But you would never know that without that date context. I've rambled enough. Your turn.
Well, yeah, it's like the multiple sins of a cycle time histogram. We're not only are we using histogram to show time series data, we're also analyzing it using some weird math that we came up with, and we're also not separating the non-homogeneous parts of the data. We're not separating the systems out to analyze them separately. So it's multiple sins of data analysis all happening at the same time.
I think kind of the overarching sin, the medicine of all of that is just by looking at the histogram, you would never know that you're committing those sins, right? I mean, you just, and there's no way to course correct. Again, just by looking at a histogram, you would not know.
Yeah, and that's probably a very important point to make. That hey, it's okay to not use perfect methods. It's completely fine if you don't use perfect methods. Things that are imperfect can very often lead you to the right interventions. But when these imperfect methods lead you to the wrong interventions, at that point you don't have anything to fall back upon. You don't have anything to go back and say, hey, why did we end up here? And that's probably why we keep saying don't use histograms for time series data.
Yeah. And just so we're clear, because I hope we have been clear, the scatter plot the cycle time scatter plot is by far and away superior to the histogram in terms of doing the analysis, probably most of the analysis that you will ever need to do, and doesn't suffer from any of the problems of the histogram. So chances are, if all you do is look at your data in a scatter plot, you will never, ever have to look at a histogram ever. There will almost be no reason to. I never say never, right? But pretty much all the information that you can get off a histogram, you can get off a scatter plot and more. So
yeah, that's probably the most important point of that, which is you are getting all the information that you were getting from the histogram when you're looking at a scatter plot, and you're not committing those sins of bad analysis. So you're getting all the same information, you're getting the time context, so you can really drive better decisions. And at the end of the day, we look at our data and we visualize it to drive better decisions.
Okay, so
likely to happen with a scatter plot.
Let me trigger you here. Now that I just cut you off, I'm gonna trigger you, Prateek. But the whole reason we need to look at a histogram, Prateek, isn't it so that we can fit this data to a well-known probability distribution? Because how else will we know what distribution it is if we don't take this data and make a Weibull or Weibull or however you say that curve out of it, or Poisson distribution or whatever?
What was that?
How would we know? Wakeby. Wakeby, take a drink. The Wakeby distribution, yes. So Prateek, I mean, in some seriousness, can you help our viewers, because they've probably been told that's one of the things you should do is fit your cycle time data to a distribution.
Yeah, and that's so. People do that for a couple of reasons. First is to understand your data better, to understand what's happening with your data better. As we said earlier, you look at a scatter plot, it'll give you a lot more information about what's happening with your data and what's happening with your system than the histogram will. And frankly, it's like it's again because math. Just because we're looking at a bad visualization already, and putting math on top of it is not going to make it better. It's similar to that 5.6 thing. It's just because you're putting math on top of something does not make it better. That's one thing. The other thing that I've seen very often, and it's usually done with throughput data, is people put a distribution on it so that they can sample from it. And spoiler alert, that's bad too. We have a I think episode 4 or 5 was somewhere where we covered it on one of the Monte Carlo episodes. Yeah, that's equally as bad. Your system is producing real data. This is real stuff that is being generated by your system. You don't need a mathematical distribution to tell you what's happening. Look at your real raw data. No cycle. A mathematical distribution will have a cycle time of 2.37. Try to find that in your real data. You probably won't find a cycle time of 2.37.
I mean, yeah, certainly a continuous distribution would have that for sure. You're exactly right. And this is where if you go back to that episode, this is where we draw on the work of Dr. Sam Savage, Flaw of Averages, where he talks about his, I think it's steam error statistics. I always quote that wrong, but I think it's called steam error statistics. They're essentially mathematical hacks. Mathematical hacks is a strong word. Mathematical shortcuts. Because they didn't have computers back then, so to do the mathematics, it was much easier to fit data to a curve. But as Dr. Sam Savage says, and also as Dr. Wheeler says in many of his publications, a Wakeby distribution did not generate your data. A viable distribution did not generate your data. Your process generated your data. And so why you would pervert your data to make it look pretty rather than just using the raw real data that you've got introduces all kinds of problems that Prateek just talked about.
Yeah. So not to sound too curmudgeon-y, you're using a bad visualization to look at time series data, and you're doing weird fat tail, thin tail math on it. And then you're putting a stream error hack or shortcut on top of it when you have you have computers that can actually record this data and show it to you and do the math for you instead of trying to take shortcuts.
So hopefully everybody understands we are coming at this slightly from a position of altruism. I mean, we generally want you to not waste your time. We generally want you to not struggle to understand concepts that you just don't need to know, right? There's a crude term I could use for a lot of what people talk about that I'm trying desperately.
You're about 2 drinks short of that.
Yeah, but just know it doesn't have to be that complicated. It doesn't have to be that nasty. It can be very, very simple. So Prateek, can you just maybe kind of to wrap this up and to finish up, can you reiterate? I mean, if I stop this, what are the things that we recommend? So if not histograms, what do people do?
Yeah, if you're looking at your cycle time, go look at your scatter plot. Go take a look and see what the trends look like over time. Has your system changed? Has just like you saw in that example, there was a big shift in that system. And how is that change going? What results has that produced? Use the a tool like Actionable Analytics gives you percentile lines, which tell you how many things are getting done in taking how long to get done. So 85% of the time we get things done in 10 days or less, or whatever that is. 95% of the time it's 15 days or less. Use those to figure out how your system is performing. In fact, look at the trend of those to see how that's been changing as you've made changes. Use something like a scatter plot that shows time series data where time is one of the axes. That you use something like that so that you can actually analyze it in context of the other data around it.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. That how truly powerful this scatter plot is. If for no other reason, it's powerful in its simplicity. If you really care about whether you're dealing with homogeneous data or not, or whether your system is stable or not, then you're going to need to jump to control charts, and then you're going to need to do something like statistical process control. But again, we steal all our best material from Frank Vega, so I'm just going to steal more stuff from him. Frank Vega loves to say, so yes, you can do the control chart stuff, but 80-90% of the time you can probably just eyeball it off the scatter plot, and that's good enough. You won't have to go through the nastiness of putting your data in a control chart, because to be honest with you, the statistical process control is fairly rigorous, and it's the same thing. Dr. Wheeler talks about this all the time too. There's just not a lot of good software out there that does them properly, at least not the way that Shewhart talked about it. So there's nastiness that. Don't worry about that nastiness. Eyeball it with the scatter plot. Again, that's not mathematically rigorous, but for what we're talking about, I mean, we're not talking about life and death. It's good enough. It's really good enough.
And I know Dan hasn't mentioned this before, but a scatter plot is not a control chart. Just there'll be people who'll tell you they're the same thing. They're not.
Thanks for clarifying that. I was just assuming that people
I know.
But that's important that people know that. Prateek, as always, I'd like to give you the last word. Anything from your end that you haven't said before that you want to make sure gets out there?
No, I mean, if you're looking at time series data, make sure that time is a component of how you're showing it, and that's mostly it. I mean, you don't need to get more complicated than a scatter plot to really get good, actionable information off of it.
Actually, let's let Dr. Shewhart have the last word. Can you reread that quote, please? Do you have that handy? Is that possible?
All right. So Dr. Shewhart says, whenever an average, range, or histogram is used to summarize data, the summary should not mislead the user into taking action that the user would not take if the data were presented in a time series.
Couldn't say it better myself. For the star of our show, Nisha, in the background there, for the Yogi Bear, oh yeah, there she is. Hey Nisha, hi sweetie. And for the Yogi Bear of Agile, Prateek Singh, my name is Daniel Vacanti. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next episode. Good night, everybody.